The cold wind whipped through the narrow alleyways of a small town in upstate New York. Snowflakes clung to the edges of broken windows and crumbled bricks, painting a grim picture of neglect. It was late at night, and the streets were mostly empty, save for the occasional car driving by or the distant hum of a train passing through. In one particularly dark corner, near an abandoned building that had long been forgotten by the world, a man sat huddled under a tattered blanket. His name was Elijah Johnson. Elijah wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, he wore a uniform with pride, standing tall as a Marine who served his country during 2 grueling tours in Afghanistan. He had medals pinned to his chest, stories etched into his memory, and dreams of building a life worth living when he returned home. But war changes people, and so does life. Over the years, Elijah lost everything: his job, his family, and eventually, his sense of belonging. Now all he had left was the worn-out jacket on his back and the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. That night, Elijah had wandered into the abandoned building looking for shelter from the biting cold. The structure was old, its roof leaking, in places, and its walls covered in graffiti. Inside it smelled of dampness and decay, but to Elijah it felt safer than sleeping on the icy pavement outside. He found a spot near what used to be a fireplace and settled down, pulling his thin blanket tighter around himself. He didn't know it then, but this decision would change his life forever. As the hours passed, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. At first, Elijah thought nothing of it. This part of town was quiet, but not completely deserted. People often walked these streets even if they tried to avoid eye contact with someone like him, a man whose appearance screamed hardship. But these footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, until finally, they stopped just outside the building. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dusty interior. "Hey, is anyone in here?" a voice called out. It was firm yet cautious, belonging to someone who meant business. Elijah froze. He hadn't expected anyone to come looking for him. Slowly, he raised his hands into the air, trying to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm here," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "I'm not doing anything wrong." 2 figures stepped inside, their uniforms unmistakable. They were police officers, one older with salt and pepper hair and the other younger, barely out of his 20s. The older officer, whose badge read Matthews, approached Elijah carefully. His eyes scanned the room before landing on the frail figure sitting on the floor. "What are you doing here, sir?" Officer Matthews asked, his tone softer now that he saw Elijah posed no danger. "I needed somewhere warm to sleep," Elijah replied honestly. "It's freezing out there." Officer Matthews nodded, though his expression remained serious. "This building is private property. You can't stay here." Elijah sighed deeply. He knew this moment would come sooner or later. Every place he went, someone told him he didn't belong. Still, he tried to explain. "I didn't mean any harm, I don't have anywhere else to go." The younger officer, whose name tag read Rodriguez, exchanged a glance with Matthews. There was sympathy in his eyes, but also uncertainty. They both knew how hard it was for people like Elijah, those who fell through the cracks of society, but rules were rules. Trespassing was still trespassing, no matter the circumstances. "We'll need to take you in," Matthews said finally, his voice tinged with regret. "You'll have to come with us." Elijah didn't argue. He'd learned, long ago, that fighting against the system only made things worse. Instead, he stood slowly, wincing as his stiff joints protested the movement. Wrapping his blanket around his shoulders, he followed the officers outside where their patrol car waited under the dim glow of a street lamp. Word of Elijah's arrest spread quickly through the small town. By morning, everyone seemed to know about the homeless man taken into custody for trespassing. Some shook their heads in disapproval, muttering about how vagrants caused trouble wherever they went. Others felt a pang of pity, wondering what kind of life led someone to such desperation. And then there were those who recognized something familiar about Elijah, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. At the precinct, Elijah was processed quietly. His fingerprints were taken, and his mugshot captured the weary lines of his face. When asked for identification, he admitted he didn't have any. They got lost, he said simply, unwilling to elaborate further. The officers noted his lack of cooperation but pressed no further. Something about him commanded respect, even in his current state. Later that day, Elijah found himself seated beside a young woman named Lisa Monroe, who had been assigned as his public defender. She was new to the legal field, eager to make a difference but unsure of how to handle cases like this. Her neatly pressed suit and polished shoes contrasted sharply with Elijah's ragged appearance, but she greeted him warmly, nonetheless. "Mr. Johnson," she began, opening a folder on her lap, "I understand you were arrested for trespassing last night. Do you want to tell me your side of the story?" Elijah hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing his thoughts with strangers, especially not ones dressed in suits. But something about Lisa's earnest expression made him feel safe enough to speak. "I was just trying to stay warm," he said softly. "I didn't think anyone cared about that old building anymore." Lisa nodded, jotting notes onto a yellow legal pad. "Okay. We'll work on getting the charges dropped, but I'll need to know more about you, your background, your history, anything that might help us build a strong defense." For a moment, Elijah considered refusing. Talking about his past meant reopening wounds he'd spent years trying to heal. Yet deep down he knew Lisa was right. If he wanted a chance at freedom, he had to trust her. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "I used to be a Marine," he said, his voice steady despite the memories flooding back. "Served 2 tours overseas, came back, different. Lost my job, my family. Couldn't keep up with rent. Been on the streets ever since." Lisa listened intently, her pen moving furiously across the page. What Elijah didn't realize was that his words carried more weight than he imagined. Unbeknownst to him, his story, and his name, would soon shake an entire courtroom to its core. As the days passed, preparations for Elijah's trial moved forward. Prosecutor Ryan Carter reviewed the case file, determined to prove that laws must be upheld regardless of personal circumstances. Meanwhile, Lisa worked tirelessly to gather evidence and witnesses who could testify on Elijah's behalf. Neither of them suspected the bombshell waiting to explode when Elijah's full name was revealed in court. And so, as the date of the trial drew near, Elijah sat alone in his cell, staring at the cracked ceiling above him. He wondered if justice truly existed for men like him, or if he was destined to remain invisible, another forgotten soul swallowed by the system. Little did he know the truth about who he was would soon bring the entire town to its feet. The morning of the trial arrived, and the small courthouse buzzed with quiet anticipation. It wasn't often that a case involving a homeless man drew much attention in this sleepy town, but something about Elijah Johnson's story had captured people's curiosity. Reporters lingered outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the defendant or perhaps snap a photo for their evening news segments. Inside, the courtroom slowly filled with spectators, locals curious about the outcome, a few veterans who felt compelled to attend, and even some members of the real estate developer who owned the abandoned building where Elijah had sought shelter. Elijah sat quietly beside his public defender, Lisa Monroe, his hands clasped tightly together in his lap. He wore clothes borrowed from the county jail, a plain gray shirt and dark pants that were slightly too big for his thin frame. His face was clean-shaven, though his beard stubble still showed faint traces of gray. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, as if years of hardship hadn't completely erased the soldier he once was. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Ryan Carter shuffled through his papers, preparing his opening statement. He was a seasoned lawyer known for his sharp mind and unyielding approach to justice. To him, this was a straightforward case. Elijah had broken the law by trespassing on private property, and the law must be upheld. Yet, as he glanced at Elijah, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. Still, duty outweighed doubt, and Ryan resolved to do what he believed was right. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Patricia Bennett entered the courtroom. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp features and an authoritative presence. Her reputation preceded her. She was known for being fair but firm, ruling without hesitation when it came to matters of the law. As she took her seat behind the bench, the room fell silent, all eyes turning toward her. "Court is now in session," Judge Bennett announced, her voice clear and commanding. "We are here today to hear the case of the people versus Elijah Johnson. Mr. Johnson, please rise." With Lisa's gentle encouragement, Elijah stood slowly, his movements deliberate but steady. He kept his gaze fixed ahead, avoiding the stares of those watching him. The judge studied him briefly, her expression unreadable before addressing Lisa. "Counselor, would you please state your client's full name for the record?" Judge Bennett asked. Lisa nodded and turned to face the judge. "Your Honor, my client's full name is Elijah Marcus Johnson." The moment those words left her lips, a strange hush fell over the courtroom. At first, no one moved. Then, almost imperceptibly, a single person rose to their feet. Another followed, then another, until the entire room was standing, all except for Elijah himself, who remained seated looking confused by the sudden display of respect. Judge Bennett, too, had risen from her chair, her face pale with shock. For several seconds, no one spoke. The air seemed heavy with emotion, charged with memories long buried but never forgotten. Lisa looked around in bewilderment, unsure of what had just happened. "Your Honor?" she ventured cautiously, glancing between the judge and the crowd. "Is everything all right?" Judge Bennett cleared her throat, visibly composing herself. "Yes, Counselor," she said, her voice steadier now. "Please proceed." Though the judge gave no explanation, whispers began to ripple through the courtroom. Some people exchanged knowing looks while others wiped tears from their eyes. Even Ryan Carter appeared shaken, his usual confidence faltering as he flipped through his notes, searching for answers. When the initial commotion died down, Judge Bennett called for order. "Let us continue," she said firmly, though her tone carried a hint of unease. "Prosecution, you may begin your opening statement." Ryan hesitated, clearly unsettled by the unexpected turn of events. After a brief pause, he stood and addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today because the defendant, Elijah Johnson, knowingly violated the law by trespassing on private property. While I understand that circumstances can sometimes complicate matters, the fact remains that laws exist to protect our communities. They apply to everyone equally, regardless of personal history or situation." His words were measured, but they lacked the conviction they'd held earlier. He glanced at Elijah, then quickly looked away as if unable to meet his gaze. When it was Lisa's turn to speak, she approached the jury box with determination. "Members of the jury, my client is not disputing the fact that he entered the building in question. However, context matters. Elijah Johnson sought refuge from the freezing cold, not out of malice but out of necessity. This isn't merely a case of trespassing, it's a reflection of larger issues facing our society, including homelessness, and the lack of support for veterans like Mr. Johnson, who have sacrificed so much for our country." Her argument resonated with many in the room, particularly the veterans who had come to show their support. One elderly man sitting near the back nodded vigorously, his weathered face etched with pride and sorrow. As the trial progressed, the prosecution presented its evidence: photographs of the abandoned building, testimony from the property owner, and statements from Officer Matthews and Officer Rodriguez regarding Elijah's arrest. Each piece reinforced the case against him, painting a picture of a man who had broken the rules, but Lisa countered with her own witnesses. First, she called Daniel Hayes, a local business owner who ran a diner downtown. Daniel had seen Elijah around town over the past few months and knew him to be a kind, respectful man despite his struggles. "He's always polite," Daniel testified. "Never asks for handouts unless it's absolutely necessary. You can tell he's carrying a lot of weight on his shoulders." Next, Lisa introduced Amanda Wright, a nurse who volunteered at a nearby clinic. Amanda described how Elijah occasionally visited for basic medical care, refusing charity whenever possible. "He's proud," she said, "and he doesn't want to burden anyone. But he's also hurting, physically and emotionally. I believe he deserves compassion, not punishment." Throughout the proceedings, Elijah remained silent, letting Lisa and the witnesses speak on his behalf. Occasionally, he would glance at the spectators, noting the mix of pity, admiration, and confusion in their expressions. He didn't fully understand why his name had caused such a reaction earlier, but he sensed it had something to do with his past, a part of his life he'd tried desperately to leave behind. Finally, after hours of testimony, Judge Bennett called for a recess. As the courtroom emptied, Lisa approached Elijah, her expression both relieved and concerned. "I don't know what happened when I said your name," she admitted, lowering her voice. "But whatever it is, it's working in our favor. People are on your side now." Elijah sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "It's not something I talk about," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Lisa nodded, respecting his privacy. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share. Just know that we're doing everything we can to help you." Before Elijah could respond, a group of reporters swarmed into the hallway, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Johnson, can you comment on the reaction in the courtroom today?" one shouted. "Do you have any idea why so many people stood up for you?" Elijah flinched at the sudden attention, instinctively stepping back. Lisa stepped in front of him, shielding him from the barrage of questions. "No comment," she said firmly. "My client will not be speaking to the press at this time." As the reporters reluctantly dispersed, Elijah let out a shaky breath. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't anticipated. Yet amidst the chaos, he noticed something surprising. Strangers offering him small smiles, nods of encouragement, even whispered words of thanks. It was as if his mere presence reminded them of sacrifices made by countless others, sacrifices often overlooked or forgotten. Back inside the courtroom, Judge Bennett reconvened the session. Her demeanor had softened somewhat, though she maintained her professional composure. "Before we adjourn for the day," she announced, "I'd like to request that Mr. Johnson join me in chambers for a private discussion." The request sent ripples of curiosity through the room, but no one dared question it. As Elijah followed Lisa and the judge into the adjacent chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change, in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Inside the chamber, Judge Bennett closed the door behind them, ensuring their conversation would remain confidential. She gestured for Elijah to take a seat, then leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice softer now, "I need to ask you something. Are you the same Elijah Marcus Johnson who served in Afghanistan, the one awarded the Medal of Honor?" Elijah froze, his heart pounding in his chest. For years he had avoided answering that question, burying the pain and guilt associated with his military service. Now, faced with the truth staring him in the face, he realized there was no point in denying it any longer. "Yes," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's me." Judge Bennett exhaled sharply, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding for decades. "I thought so," she murmured. "Your actions saved dozens of lives during that ambush. You're a hero, Mr. Johnson. A true hero." Elijah shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't feel like one," he admitted. "Not anymore." The judge reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on his arm. The revelation of Elijah Johnson's true identity spread like wildfire. By the time he and Lisa returned to the courtroom, whispers filled the air, and reporters scrambled to capture every detail. Judge Bennett had instructed everyone to remain calm and respectful, but it was clear that the mood in the room had shifted dramatically. People looked at Elijah differently now, not as a homeless man accused of trespassing, but as a hero whose story had been hidden for far too long. As the ID trial resumed, Judge Bennett announced that she would grant a temporary adjournment to allow both sides to reassess their positions in light of new information. This decision gave Lisa and Ryan time to regroup, though neither of them needed much convincing about what should happen next. For Lisa, the path forward was clear. All charges against Elijah must be dropped immediately. Ryan, however, faced a moral dilemma. On one hand, his duty was to uphold the law. On the other, prosecuting a decorated war veteran under these circumstances seemed cruel and unjust. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward as journalists rushed to file stories about the forgotten Medal of Honor recipient. Social media buzzed with reactions ranging from outrage over how Elijah had been treated to admiration for his quiet resilience. Hashtags like Deserve Justice for Elijah and Forgotten Heroes trended locally, drawing attention not only to his case but also to broader issues affecting veterans nationwide. Back inside, Lisa pulled Elijah aside after the adjournment. "Listen," she said firmly, "we're going to get this sorted out. I promise you won't have to stay in jail another night." Her confidence bolstered Elijah's spirits, though he still struggled to process everything happening around him. The sudden spotlight made him uneasy, reminding him of the relentless scrutiny he'd endured when he first came home from Afghanistan. "I didn't ask for any of this," Elijah murmured, staring at his hands. "I just wanted to be left alone." Lisa placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know, but sometimes life doesn't give us what we want. It gives us what we need. And right now, people are waking up to the fact that heroes like you deserve better than what they've gotten." While Lisa worked tirelessly behind the scenes, others in the community began taking action. Daniel Hayes, the diner owner who had testified earlier, approached Elijah during a break in the proceedings. "You don't know me well," he said, "but I've got an apartment above my place. It's small, but it's warm and safe. You can stay there until you figure things out." Elijah hesitated, unsure whether accepting help would make him feel beholden to someone else, but Daniel's sincerity broke through his resistance. "Thank you," Elijah said softly, nodding in gratitude. "I'll think about it." Amanda Wright, the nurse who had volunteered at the clinic, also stepped up. She offered to connect Elijah with resources for veterans, including mental health counseling and medical care. "You've carried this burden alone for too long," she told him gently. "Let us help you carry it now." Even Officer Matthews, who had arrested Elijah days earlier, visited him to apologize. Standing awkwardly near the courthouse steps, Matthews extended his hand. "I'm sorry for how this went down," he said earnestly. "If I'd known who you were, or what you'd been through, I never would have brought you in." Elijah shook his hand, offering a faint smile. "It's okay," he replied. "You were doing your job. I don't blame you." Despite the outpouring of support, Elijah found it hard to accept kindness. Years of isolation had conditioned him to believe he didn't deserve it. He often retreated into himself, wrestling with feelings of guilt and inadequacy. Lisa noticed this and decided to take matters into her own hands. She arranged for Elijah to meet Chris Holloway, a fellow Marine who had served in a different unit overseas. Now retired, Chris worked with a local veterans outreach program, helping service members transition back into civilian life. When Elijah arrived at the outreach center, he was greeted by Chris, a burly man with a kind smile and a firm handshake. "Welcome, brother," Chris said warmly. "We're glad you're here." Elijah nodded, though he felt out of place among the group gathered in the meeting room. Most of them were younger, struggling with injuries or PTSD, eager to find their footing again. As Chris introduced him to the group, Elijah listened quietly, unsure of what to say. Later, during a private conversation, Chris encouraged Elijah to share his experiences. "These guys look up to people like you," Chris explained. "They need to hear that they're not alone, that even heroes struggle sometimes." Elijah hesitated, his throat tightening at the thought of reliving painful memories. But something in Chris's words struck a chord. Maybe sharing his story could help others heal, just as hearing theirs might help him. Meanwhile, prosecutor Ryan Carter wrestled with his conscience. After reviewing Elijah's military records and speaking with colleagues, he realized the magnitude of what Elijah had done during the ambush. The official report described how Elijah had braved enemy fire to drag wounded comrades to safety, refusing to leave anyone behind despite sustaining injuries himself. His actions had saved dozens of lives, earning him the Medal of Honor, the highest recognition a soldier could receive. Ryan couldn't ignore the weight of that sacrifice. Sitting at his desk late one night, he drafted a motion to dismiss all charges against Elijah. Though he knew some might criticize him for abandoning the case, he believed it was the right thing to do. When he presented the motion to Judge Bennett, the following morning she wasted no time approving it. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice tinged with approval, "sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about redemption. Thank you for recognizing that." With the charges officially dropped, Elijah felt a mix of relief and confusion. For so long he had lived in fear of judgment, expecting nothing but rejection from the world. Now, strangers were treating him like family, offering him shelter, food, and friendship. It was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. Encouraged by Lisa and Chris, Elijah agreed to speak at a Veterans Day assembly held at the local high school. The event was organized by Mayor Karen Ellis, who had heard about Elijah's story and wanted to honor him publicly. At first, Elijah resisted the idea, fearing public speaking would bring back traumatic memories, but Lisa reminded him of the impact his words could have. "You don't have to talk about the war if you don't want to," she assured him. "Just tell them who you are and why remembering our veterans matters." On the day of the assembly, Elijah stood backstage, his heart pounding as he listened to the principal introduce him. When his name was called, he walked onto the stage greeted by thunderous applause. Hundreds of students and teachers rose to their feet, cheering for the man they'd only recently learned about. Elijah took a deep breath, gripping the podium tightly. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm not used to being celebrated. In fact, for a long time, I thought I didn't deserve it. But today, I'm here to remind you that no matter how hard life gets, there's always hope. There are people willing to help, you just have to let them." He went on to share bits of his journey, from enlisting in the Marines to surviving the horrors of war, and finally to finding purpose again after hitting rock bottom. His words resonated deeply, leaving many in tears and prompting standing ovations. By the end of the speech, donations poured in for organizations supporting homeless veterans inspired by Elijah's courage and humility. In the weeks that followed, Elijah embraced his new role as an advocate for veterans. With guidance from Lisa and Chris, he started volunteering regularly at the outreach center, mentoring young service members and encouraging them to seek help. His presence inspired others to open up, breaking down stigmas surrounding mental health and homelessness. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, Elijah began to see himself differently. He wasn't just a broken man trying to survive. He was a beacon of hope, proof that even those who fall can rise again. And while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he knew he wouldn't have to walk it alone. One evening, as Elijah sat in the cozy apartment above Daniel's diner, he reflected on how far he'd come. Letters from grateful strangers covered the coffee table, alongside photos of him shaking hands with students and veterans alike. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream, to imagine a future where he could rebuild what he'd lost. His daughter, Sophia, reached out soon after the assembly, traveling from Chicago to visit him. Their reunion was emotional but filled with promise as they worked to mend their fractured relationship. Together, they began planning visits and phone calls, determined to reconnect. As snow fell gently outside his window, Elijah smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. He still carried the weight of his past, but now he also carried something else, the knowledge that he mattered, that his sacrifices hadn't been forgotten, and that perhaps he could still make a difference. Elijah's life began to transform in ways he never thought possible. The attention his story received brought not only kindness from strangers but also tangible support that helped him rebuild his life. Daniel Hayes kept his promise, providing Elijah with a small apartment above his diner. It wasn't much, a single room with a bed, a table, and a chair, but it was warm, clean, and safe. For the first time in years, Elijah had a place to call home. Every morning, Elijah would wake up early and sit by the window, watching the sun rise over the quiet town. He found comfort in the routine, sipping coffee Daniel always left for him at the counter downstairs. Sometimes he'd help out around the diner, wiping tables or washing dishes when things got busy. Daniel insisted he didn't have to work, but Elijah needed something to occupy his mind. Helping others gave him purpose, even in small ways. The Outreach Center became another anchor in Elijah's life. Chris Holloway introduced him to more veterans who were struggling with their own battles, some physical, some mental, and some both. Many of them looked up to Elijah, seeing him as proof that healing was possible. At first, Elijah felt unworthy of their admiration, but Chris reminded him that sharing his journey could inspire hope in others. One day, during a group session, a young soldier named Marcus opened up about his struggles with PTSD. "I feel like I don't belong anywhere anymore," Marcus admitted, his voice trembling, "like I'm stuck between two worlds." Elijah listened intently, nodding along. When it was his turn to speak, he took a deep breath and said, "I know exactly how you feel. For years I told myself I didn't deserve to be part of anything. But here's the thing. We all carry scars inside and out. What matters is finding people who understand those scars and learning to live with them without letting them define us." His words struck a chord with everyone in the room. Afterward, several veterans approached him to thank him for speaking so honestly. It was a turning point for Elijah. For the first time, he realized his pain could serve a greater purpose, not just for himself, but for others too. Meanwhile, Lisa Monroe continued to advocate for Elijah beyond the courtroom. She reached out to local organizations and government agencies, pushing for better resources for homeless veterans. Her efforts gained traction after Elijah's case made headlines, drawing attention to the systemic issues affecting service members returning home. Donations poured in, funding initiatives aimed at providing housing, healthcare, and job training for veterans in need. Lisa often checked in on Elijah, ensuring he was adjusting well to his new circumstances. One afternoon, she visited him at the diner where they sat together in a corner booth sipping coffee. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her tone warm yet concerned. Elijah shrugged, stirring sugar into his cup. "Better than before," he replied. "Still trying to figure things out, though. Feels strange being noticed again." Lisa smiled softly. "You earned it, Elijah. People see your strength now, not just your struggles." He nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. Accepting praise still felt foreign to him, but he appreciated Lisa's encouragement. Over time, he grew more comfortable opening up to her, sharing bits of his past that he rarely spoke about. As weeks turned into months, Elijah slowly began reconnecting with pieces of his old life, including his daughter, Sophia. Their relationship had been strained since he lost touch with her years ago, but hearing about his story reignited her desire to reach out. She traveled from Chicago to visit him one weekend, bringing gifts and photographs from their shared past. When Elijah saw her standing outside the diner, tears welled up in his eyes. He hadn't seen Sophia since she was a teenager, and guilt weighed heavily on him as he embraced her. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking, "for everything." Sophia hugged him tightly, shaking her head. "Dad, stop apologizing. We've got time to fix this, to start over." Their reunion was emotional, filled with laughter, tears, and long conversations about what went wrong. Sophia admitted she had been angry with him for disappearing, but now she understood the weight of his sacrifices. Together they vowed to rebuild their bond, starting with regular phone calls and visits. While Elijah worked on mending relationships, the community rallied around him in unexpected ways. Mayor Karen Ellis invited him to join a committee focused on improving veteran services in the town. At first, Elijah hesitated, unsure if he had anything valuable to contribute. But Lisa encouraged him to accept, reminding him that his perspective as a veteran and survivor was invaluable. During meetings, Elijah spoke candidly about the challenges veterans faced, from navigating bureaucratic red tape to coping with isolation and trauma. His insights inspired action, leading to the creation of programs designed to address these issues directly. One initiative provided free counseling sessions for veterans and their families, while another offered job training workshops tailored to skills acquired during military service. Elijah's involvement in the committee also brought him closer to other community leaders, including Amanda Wright, the nurse who had volunteered at the clinic. They collaborated closely, brainstorming ideas to expand access to medical care for underserved populations. Their partnership blossomed into a friendship, with Amanda checking in regularly to ensure Elijah prioritized his own health. Though progress was slow, Elijah embraced each step forward with determination. He started attending therapy sessions himself, confronting years of buried emotions under the guidance of a compassionate counselor. Talking about his experiences, both in Afghanistan and afterward, was painful, but it helped lighten the burden he carried. Gradually, he learned to forgive himself for the losses he couldn't prevent and focus on the future instead. Back at the diner, Elijah became a familiar face among regular customers. Some knew his story, others simply enjoyed his quiet presence. Children loved him because he always slipped them extra cookies with their meals, while older patrons appreciated his thoughtful advice. To them, he wasn't just a war hero or a former homeless man. He was Elijah, a kind soul who radiated resilience despite his hardships. Even Officer Matthews stopped by occasionally, sitting at the counter and chatting with Elijah about sports or the weather. Their interactions were lighthearted, a far cry from the tense moment of their initial encounter. "You're doing good, Eli," Matthews said one evening, using the nickname everyone had adopted. "Real good," Elijah chuckled, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "Thanks, Matt, means a lot coming from you." Despite the positivity surrounding him, Elijah still wrestled with moments of doubt. Old habits died hard, and sometimes he wondered if he truly deserved the second chance he'd been given. On nights when sleep eluded him, he'd sit by the window staring at the stars and reflecting on the lives he couldn't save. Yet, even in those dark moments, he clung to the belief that his sacrifices hadn't been in vain, that somehow they mattered. Chris Holloway noticed Elijah's lingering struggles and suggested he try journaling as a way to process his thoughts. "Write down whatever comes to mind," Chris advised. "It doesn't have to make sense, just let it flow." At first, Elijah resisted the idea, unsure if putting pen to paper would help. But one restless night, he decided to give it a shot. Sitting at the small table in his apartment, he scribbled random phrases and fragmented memories onto blank pages. Over time, his entries grew longer, more coherent. Writing became a form of release, allowing him to confront his demons without judgment. Through journaling, Elijah discovered a hidden talent for storytelling. His words painted vivid pictures of his childhood, his time in the Marines, and the quiet moments of beauty he found amidst chaos. Encouraged by Lisa, he shared some of his writings at the Outreach Center, where they resonated deeply with fellow veterans. "Your stories remind us we're not alone," one attendee told him after a reading session. By spring, Elijah's transformation was undeniable. He walked taller, spoke louder, and smiled more often. The once broken man who sought refuge in an abandoned building had emerged stronger, wiser, and full of hope. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, he no longer let them dictate his life. One sunny afternoon, as Elijah strolled through the park near the courthouse, he paused to watch children playing on the swings. Their laughter echoed through the air, filling him with warmth. For so long he had believed happiness was out of reach. Now he realized it wasn't about erasing the past, it was about finding joy in the present, no matter how imperfect. As he stood there, soaking in the simple pleasures of life, Elijah felt a profound sense of peace. He wasn't the same man he'd been before the war, nor was he the man who wandered aimlessly through empty streets. He was someone new, someone shaped by loss, love, and redemption. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, he knew he had the strength to keep moving forward. As summer approached, Elijah Johnson found himself settling into a rhythm he hadn't known in years. His days were filled with purpose, helping at the diner, mentoring veterans, attending committee meetings, and writing in his journal. Each task gave him a sense of accomplishment, something tangible to hold on to as he rebuilt his life. The town that had once ignored him now embraced him, treating him like family. Strangers greeted him warmly on the street, and children waved excitedly when they saw him. It was strange but comforting, a reminder that people could change their minds and their hearts. One morning, while wiping down tables at Daniel's diner, Elijah overheard two customers talking about a memorial being planned for fallen soldiers. Curious, he asked Daniel about it later. "Oh, you mean the Veterans Tribute Monument?" Daniel replied, leaning against the counter. "Mayor Ellis is spearheading it. They're dedicating it to all the heroes who served and sacrificed." Elijah nodded thoughtfully, feeling a mix of pride and sorrow. Monuments were important, they kept memories alive. But he wondered how many names would truly be remembered. So many veterans slipped through the cracks after returning home, their struggles unseen by the world. He wanted this tribute to honor, not just those who died in battle, but also those who fought silent wars long after the guns fell silent. That evening, Elijah attended a planning meeting for the monument. Mayor Karen Ellis welcomed him warmly, inviting him to share his thoughts. Sitting among community leaders and fellow veterans, Elijah hesitated before speaking. "This is a great idea," he began, choosing his words carefully. "But I think we should include everyone, not just the ones who didn't make it back. We need to remember the living, too, the ones still fighting every day." His suggestion resonated with the group, sparking discussions about how to broaden the scope of the tribute. Someone proposed adding plaques with stories of resilience, highlighting veterans who overcame adversity. Another suggested including resources for mental health and housing support at the site itself. By the end of the meeting, plans for the monument had expanded beyond a simple statue. It would become a symbol of hope and healing for the entire community. Over the next few months, Elijah threw himself into the project. He worked closely with Amanda Wright to gather stories from local veterans, ensuring no one was left out. Some were hesitant to share, fearing judgment or pity, but Elijah reassured them. "Your story matters," he told each person. "It reminds others they're not alone." As word spread about the tribute, donations poured in from across the country. People sent letters of gratitude, sharing how Elijah's journey inspired them to reach out to veterans in their own communities. One letter came from a woman whose son had taken his own life after returning from deployment. She thanked Elijah for giving her hope that others might find help before it was too late. The process wasn't without challenges. There were disagreements about design choices, funding shortages, and logistical hurdles, but Elijah remained patient, reminding everyone why they were doing this. "We're building more than a monument," he said during one heated debate. "We're building a future where no veteran feels forgotten." Amid the chaos of organizing the tribute, Elijah continued to mend relationships in his personal life. His daughter, Sophia, visited regularly, bringing photos and mementos from their past. Together, they pieced together fragments of happier times, family vacations, holiday dinners, quiet moments spent fishing by the lake. Slowly, the gap between them began to close. Sophia encouraged Elijah to reconnect with other family members, including his younger brother James, whom he hadn't spoken to in decades. At first, Elijah resisted, fearing rejection or awkwardness. But Sophia persisted, arranging a phone call between them. To Elijah's surprise, James sounded genuinely happy to hear from him. "I've missed you, big brother," James admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's not wait so long next time." Reconnecting with James brought unexpected joy into Elijah's life. They exchanged stories about their families, shared updates on mutual friends, and even joked about old childhood antics. Though years apart had changed them both, their bond remained strong. Elijah realized that forgiveness extended beyond forgiving. Himself, it meant reaching out to others and letting go of grudges. Meanwhile, Elijah's relationship with Lisa Monroe deepened as well. Though she had initially been his lawyer, their connection evolved into a genuine friendship. Lisa often joined him for walks around town, offering advice or simply listening when he needed to talk. She admired his strength and determination, qualities she rarely saw in others facing similar struggles. "You've come so far, Eli," Lisa said one afternoon as they strolled along the riverbank. "Do you ever stop to think about how much you've inspired people?" Elijah shook his head, smiling faintly. I don't do this for recognition. I just want to help where I can. Lisa chuckled softly. Well, whether you realize it or not, you're making a difference, and that's worth celebrating. By late summer, preparations for the Veterans Tribute Monument were nearly complete. A grand unveiling ceremony was scheduled for September, coinciding with National Suicide Prevention Month. The timing felt significant to Elijah. It underscored the importance of addressing mental health issues within the veteran community. On the day of the event, the town square buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of people gathered to witness the dedication, including veterans, families, local officials, and reporters. Flags fluttered in the breeze and patriotic music played softly in the background. At the center of it all stood the monument, a towering sculpture of a soldier kneeling beside a fallen comrade, surrounded by plaques engraved with names and stories of courage. Elijah sat near the front row, flanked by Sophia and Chris Holloway. As Mayor Ellis stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell silent. Today, we honor not only those who gave everything for our freedom, she began, her voice steady and clear, but also those who continue to fight battles long after the war ends. This monument is a testament to their resilience and a promise that they will never be forgotten. When she finished speaking, she invited Elijah to join her on stage. Nervous but determined, he rose from his seat and walked to the microphone. The audience erupted into applause, standing once again to show their respect. For a moment, Elijah felt overwhelmed, his chest tightening with emotion. But then he looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers, and found his voice. Thank you, he said, pausing to steady himself. When I came back from Afghanistan, I felt invisible, like my sacrifices didn't matter anymore. But today, I see proof that they did. Not because of me, but because of all of you. Because you chose to care, to listen, to act. He went on, to share snippets of his journey, emphasizing the importance of compassion and understanding. Being a hero isn't about medals or accolades, he continued. It's about showing up, for yourself, for your brothers and sisters in arms, and for the people who need you most. That's what this monument represents. That's what we represent. By the time he finished speaking, tears streamed down faces throughout the crowd. Veterans hugged loved ones tightly, while others wiped their eyes and nodded in agreement. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence, followed by the release of white doves into the sky, a symbol of peace and renewal. Afterward, Elijah mingled with attendees, shaking hands and accepting hugs. Many thanked him for his bravery, while others simply expressed gratitude for his presence. Among the crowd, he spotted Officer Matthews, who saluted him respectfully. "You're an inspiration, Eli," Matthews said sincerely. "To all of us." Elijah returned the gesture, his heart swelling with pride. For so long, he had doubted his worth, convinced he didn't deserve kindness or admiration. Now surrounded by people who believed in him, he finally understood that his sacrifices mattered, not just to him, but to everyone whose lives he touched. In the weeks following the ceremony, Elijah noticed subtle changes in the town. Conversations about mental health became more open, with fewer stigmas attached. Local businesses partnered with veteran organizations to create job opportunities, and schools incorporated lessons about military service into their curriculums. Even small acts of kindness, like offering discounts to veterans at stores or restaurants, became commonplace. Elijah played an active role in these efforts, using his platform to advocate for systemic change. He spoke at conferences, wrote op-eds for newspapers, and collaborated with lawmakers to draft policies supporting veterans' rights. Though daunting at times, the work energized him, reinforcing his belief that one person could spark meaningful progress. At the same time, Elijah prioritized his own well-being. Therapy sessions helped him confront lingering traumas, while journaling provided an outlet for self-expression. He started painting again, a hobby he'd abandoned years ago, finding solace in colors and shapes that words couldn't capture. His artwork adorned the walls of his apartment, transforming the space into a reflection of his inner world. As autumn arrived, painting the trees with hues of red and gold, Elijah took stock of his life. He had come so far, from sleeping in abandoned buildings to standing on stages inspiring thousands. Yet he knew the journey wasn't over. Healing was ongoing, a process without a definitive end. What mattered was staying committed to growth, to becoming the best version of himself. Months passed and the city of Chicago began to change, slowly but surely. The reforms announced by Mayor Patricia Cline started taking shape, bringing a sense of cautious optimism to many residents. Officers wore body cameras during patrols, and footage was reviewed regularly for accountability. Training sessions on cultural sensitivity became mandatory, and community meetings between police and citizens grew more frequent. Though some officers grumbled about the new rules, others welcomed them, seeing an opportunity to rebuild trust with the people they served. Captain Robert Hayes played a key role in overseeing these changes. Promoted to deputy chief after his bold testimony against Gary Dawson, he worked tirelessly to ensure the reforms were implemented effectively. He spent hours visiting neighborhoods, listening to concerns, and explaining how the department planned to address them. His efforts earned him respect from both colleagues and civilians, though not everyone agreed with his methods. Some officers accused him of being too soft, while others praised him for leading with integrity. Despite the criticism, Hayes remained steadfast, knowing that real change required sacrifice. For Marcus Johnson, life settled into a new rhythm. The nonprofit organization he and Nicole founded, Voices for Justice EG, quickly gained traction. They used the settlement money to rent a small office space downtown, where they held workshops, support groups, and advocacy events. Marcus became a familiar face at rallies and town halls, sharing his story and encouraging others to speak out against injustice. Nicole handled the administrative side of things, managing donations, organizing events, and keeping everything running smoothly. Their children adapted well to the changes, proud of their parents' work, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. On weekends, the family often volunteered together, handing out flyers or helping set up booths at community fairs. It wasn't always easy. Marcus still carried scars from the incident, but the sense of purpose kept him going. Lisa, Carter's reporting reached new heights as she continued covering stories related to systemic racism and police reform. Her articles inspired readers across the country, earning her recognition as one of the most influential journalists in Chicago. She collaborated closely with Marcus and Rachel Monroe, amplifying voices that had long been silenced. Together, they formed a powerful trio, each contributing their unique skills to the fight for justice. Rachel Monroe expanded her practice, taking on more cases involving victims of police misconduct. She partnered with Voices for Justice to offer free legal consultations and connect clients with resources. Her courtroom victories added fuel to the movement, proving that accountability was possible when people stood together. Though the legal system remained imperfect, Rachel refused to give up, driven by the belief that every case mattered. Meanwhile, Gary Dawson's trial loomed on the horizon. Stripped of his badge and facing criminal charges, he lived in near isolation. Friends and family had distanced themselves, unable to reconcile with the man he had become. Sandra finalized their divorce, moving out of state to start fresh. Alone, in his apartment, Gary spent hours watching news coverage of the reforms sweeping through the police department. At first, he dismissed them as unnecessary interference, but over time, doubt crept in. Was he truly blameless? Or had he allowed his biases to cloud his judgment? The trial brought these questions to the forefront. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of Gary's misconduct, including testimonies from former colleagues and victims of his past actions. Defense attorneys argued that Gary's behavior stemmed from stress and lack of proper training, but the jury wasn't convinced. After deliberating for 3 days, they returned a guilty verdict, sentencing Gary to 2 years in prison for assault and civil rights violations. The news sent shockwaves through the city. Critics called the sentence too lenient, while supporters hailed it as a rare moment of accountability. For Marcus, the verdict reinforced his belief that persistence paid off. "This isn't about revenge," he told reporters outside the courthouse. "It's about showing that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to enforce it." As the months turned into a year, the impact of Marcus's case became undeniable. Police departments nationwide took note of Chicago's reforms, implementing similar measures in their own communities. Activists credited Marcus, Lisa, and Rachel for sparking a national conversation about systemic racism and accountability. Their collaboration proved that ordinary people could inspire extraordinary change. Mayor Klein ran for re-election, campaigning on a platform of transparency and reform. Her approval ratings soared, thanks in part to the progress made under her leadership. Chief Alan Morris retired, leaving behind a legacy of commitment to justice. Captain Hayes stepped into his role as police chief, vowing to continue pushing for meaningful change. Back in Marcus's neighborhood, life felt different. Residents reported feeling safer and more respected during interactions with law enforcement. Community leaders credited Voices for Justice for fostering dialogue and holding authorities accountable. The organization received grants and awards, allowing it to expand its reach and impact. One evening, Marcus stood on the porch of his home gazing at the stars. Nicole joined him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You've done so much good," she said softly. "I'm proud of you." Marcus smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "We've done it together," he replied. "And there's still more to do." Nicole nodded, understanding that the fight for justice was never truly over. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of peace, savoring the progress they'd helped create. Across the city, similar moments unfolded. People gathered in living rooms, parks, and community centers discussing ways to sustain the momentum sparked by Marcus's courage. Lisa's articles reminded them that silence only perpetuated injustice. Rachel's victories showed them that accountability was possible, and Hayes's leadership demonstrated that change required action, not just words. As dawn broke over Chicago, the city seemed quieter than usual, a brief pause before the next chapter began. Beneath the surface, however, seeds of hope continued to grow, seeds planted by ordinary people refusing to stay silent, demanding a better future for themselves and generations to come. Marcus looked up at the sky one last time before heading inside. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. As long as people kept fighting, anything was possible.